Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. Sitting in the third seat is comedian Lou Perez. And our guest this week is Katharine Birbalsingh. She is the headmistress of the Michaela School in London. Katharine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, obviously, this is a different look. Let's address the obviously changes here. We're used to seeing the four boxes and we're together here.
Right.
We are fortunate enough to, you're stateside, because I wish I was in the UK saying that we're together, because I was checking out the school, like all my friends get to go and come back and talk about how wonderful the school is. My wife has been to the school and I haven't been. Another story. But no, you're here visiting the United States, and I thought we'd do this together, which is great. Is this the first time, Will, that we've done? No, we interviewed Paul Rossi in Boston, right, at the Parents Unite.
Yeah, we've done a few things where we were at an event, or where one or both of us was in a hotel or something like that. Where are you guys right now?
We are in at the Newsmax studios.
Okay,
Midtown Manhattan.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I don't want to bring on any hate, but that's where we are. So. No, but so we're going to obviously talk about education, and we talk a lot. So I'm trying to, mix what I repeat, because we talk all the time and what's new. But one thing I didn't get a chance to ask you one of the other times we talked to us, how did you get into this thankless career of education? So what made you start being an educator, and then why start the school?
Well, when I was at university, I suppose it was more of a Black thing. Black students, because it was at Oxford, so there weren't that many of us. This is in the early 90s, and there weren't that many Black students at Oxford. And the idea was, this kind of little organization that was started by the students was to go and talk in inner city schools in London and Birmingham and Liverpool and so on around the country, and talk to kids who might not imagine that they would belong at Oxford, and to say to them, this is the reality, and look, I'm there and I'm having a good time, and you should think about maybe applying too,
Right. So you were like a recruiter. Go and see this brown face and go join the university.
Yeah, kind of. And so, at Oxford, there were always these they call them the milk rounds, where you could go and like all these like PR companies and marketing companies and various people would come and kind of say, come and work for us and so on. And I'd go along to these meetings and think, I really can't see myself doing that. And I really loved the stuff in the schools, because you would start off talking to the kids and they would begin with, oh no, a bunch of snobs, I don't want to go there, etc. And then by the time you were finished, they would have changed their minds. And I thought, you can really make a difference, to kids and to kids that come from more disadvantaged backgrounds. And, many, many years later, like 10 years later or more, I was at another event where so by this time I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for years. I'm promoting teaching to the public, and sort of people had come to this conference to find out what teaching was all about. And I gave my little speech, and then I was walking down, and this young woman came up to me and she said, that story you just told about going into the schools. Well, I was in one of those schools, and you spoke to me, and I applied to Oxford and I got in and I did my degree, and I've been in banking for the last few years, but I don't really like it. And so now I think I'm going to become a teacher. And it was really lovely.
Wow, both getting her into Oxford and having her drop banking and get into the same career.
To see her, because you go and do these things, and often I think that's the way in teaching, which is that you spend all this time on these kids and you do all this stuff, and then they go off, and some of them you see again, but many of them you never see again, and you sort of wonder whatever happened to them. Right. Exactly. So.
Right. Will, Lou, anything you want to add before we go on?
Well, I think I was just wondering, when I think of England, I often think of like these sort of much stricter class structures. And I think as you brought up with Oxford, like, the kids saying like, oh, I don't want to go with the snobs and all that. Has there been more of an attempt to kind of bring together different classes, when it comes to like Oxford and higher education?
Yeah, well, so in those days, widening access was about sending people like me, go and talk to them, encourage them to apply, which I'm all for, and I think is a really great idea. I think that has changed now to a more affirmative action type of way of dealing with things, except it's not just about race in the way that it can be here in the US, but it might also be about, so they might take into account your postcode. Where do you live? They'll definitely take into account whether your mother or father has been to university. They'll take into account the salaries that are coming into the household. And I mean, I don't think they would ever say explicitly that they take race into account, but I don't know. I mean, certainly people would say that it makes a difference. So it's different now because, I mean, not just with Oxford or Cambridge entrance, but all sorts of jobs. It's the case that they're judging different people with different backgrounds differently, and that can cause quite a lot of resentment. I know that the private schools, for instance, in England, so a lot of families will think, I want to send my child to private school because I want to get them to have an opportunity to go to Oxford or Cambridge. And actually, a number of British privately educated students are now coming to the US Ivy League schools much more because they're not getting into Oxford and Cambridge at the rate that they used to get into them. And I mean, one argument, some people will say, well, that's because they don't deserve to be there. They're not clever enough. But, a number of our private schools are highly selective at different levels, age 11, age 13. And so those private schools that have very, very bright kids, well, you would expect them to get larger numbers of kids in. So it's a debate that rages on. Is it right to lower your standards for certain students because they haven't had as good an education, as good a supportive family background, and yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure it is. The reason why I have a real problem with it is that it means that certain communities then lower their standards for themselves, and you can hear this from the kids, and I think it can be quite destructive.
Will, would you agree that as bad as that can be in some cases, it is far and away ahead of, and we'll get to the differences between the two, with America, right? I know we just had the Supreme Court decision, but at least she said that they were taking into account, your zip code, the income of the home, and all these other things. Here it's just race. So they really benefit the rich blacks and all this other stuff, which Will talks about all the time. I'll let him talk about that. So in a sense, would you agree that that situation is better than what they do here?
Yeah, I mean, just to respond to that, yeah. I mean, I think in Europe, the great divide has always been class. I mean, Europe, and this is true in a lot of West Africa, Asia too. I mean, there used to be there still is to some extent a formalized noble class, so, there's a regiment in the British Army called the Blues and Royals that has, the Sons of the King in it. So, I mean, that's always been something that people that I've met from Europe or even from a place like Nigeria are very, very familiar with. And here in America, we don't have social classes, at least allegedly. I mean, we're one of the most income unequal countries in the world, really. But I mean, so our formal dividing line has been race. Are you black or native? What percent this or that are you? Are Irishman white? So yeah, our affirmative action system is just very openly racialized. I mean, if you look at the fair admissions case, I mean, it was stated just as a hard numerical figure that the advantage for a black applicant to our Ivy League, the equivalent of Oxbridge, was 345 points. One of you guys might correct this, but it's 290 points or something like that for Hispanic. I mean, so that was what we were doing. Asians were at a 140-point disadvantage. So yeah, I would say the British system is better. You know, if you're going to do something like that, yeah, you look at the zip codes or the post codes where people are struggling, where there's gun crime or knife crime or something. You give those kids a 50-point advantage. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense if you're going to do something like that.
And if you're not lowering the standards.
Well, I actually have one question for the guest here about kind of racial demographics. One of the things that's puzzled me about this is that, and I'm really kind of racialist or non-hereditarian, quote unquote, when I look at like group success around the world. Like a lot of the groups that are struggling in England, in addition to just white British kids, by the way, but I mean like people of West African descent, West Indians, South Asians, people of Arabic descent, those are some of the most successful groups in the USA. And the Brits don't seem to be all that much less selective with immigration than we are. So I guess one question would be, why is that? Is it a cultural thing? Was there more racism against kind of new Commonwealth immigrants till very recently? What explains that?
Well, there's a couple of things. I do think that you all are more selective, but not deliberately. So what I mean by that is, if you're in Jamaica, and you're high achieving, you're going to choose America over Britain now. 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. There was very much a sense of the mother country and you want to go to the mother country. But there's no question that, in the last 30 to 40 years, you're definitely coming to America first. So in that sense, you sort of get a different class of immigrant coming to America. But the other reason, which I've always, this is my own, there's nobody says this, it's just me who says this. So, but so in schools, there are sets that you can have. So you can have your top set, second set, third set, fourth set of the kids that are sorted by ability. And then there are schools that are more left-leaning that don't like the idea of sorting kids according to ability. So they have what's called a mixed ability way of doing things, where the kids who could go to Oxford or Cambridge with the kids who are really struggling to pass their basic English and maths, they're all in the same class and every class is just the same. Now, I'm not for that, being more of a small c conservative, but there are reasons that make sense behind that thinking, which are, when you have sets, if you're not very careful, the bottom set in your school or in your year group can have a bottom set mentality, is what they call it. And the kids just think, well, I'm in the bottom set, so it doesn't matter. And they misbehave and they don't really learn very much because they feel like they're rubbish and they're at the bottom. Now, I think that this is, it points to the way human nature is. And I think you can point to society where this is evident. And I actually think America is a great example. So the Caribbean immigrants or the African immigrants have come here, but sadly, because the African Americans have been below them, perhaps in terms of achievement, either at school or in terms of jobs and so on, the bottom set mentality is left to them, right? And the immigrants coming in have somebody to feel better than. And so in England, however, that hasn't been so much the case. And as I say, this is my own kind of analysis, but I think there's truth in it. And in England, there was nobody to feel better than, as it were. And so there they have been much more sort of bottom of the pile. And I mean, I know you're saying, I mean, there is truth in what you're saying about it being about class in Britain, but race certainly does play a part. And there's been terrible racism. In fact, I would argue that in many ways, the US is less racist than Britain.
Oh, we need to hear about this.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, actually.
It's complex. I mean, but I wouldn't, like my friends, people I knew at Oxford, that was kind of mid 90s, 93 through, down to 96 people I knew leaving. And it was kind of known that if you wanted to kind of make it in various different fields, you needed to go to America, that there really was a glass ceiling for Black people in England. And when I say it was just known amongst us. Everybody got that. And the kind of serious high flyers amongst us went to America. And there was much more of a sense of you can make it there. And I suppose that that also, it's not just about race. It's also just this sense in America that anything can happen, death of a salesman, the American dream, and, anyone can go there and anyone can make it. Whereas in England, there's a lot more structure and things work in particular kinds of ways, which, look, I wouldn't say that either. I'm very much of the opinion that race has come on in such a massive way in the last 50 years, both in the US and in the UK. So we're splitting hairs in a way when we talk about where you might find more racism. But I do think people underestimate how Britain, the way in which race plays out. But I would say that Britain, by far, is the least racist country in the whole of Europe.
US.
Well,
I was just going to say, I would. I was just. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. Like we're all kind of talking there for a second, but if I could say one very quick thing there, I don't think Europe is necessarily racist in the sense of pathological hatred of other races. I get the feeling that it's very kind of ethnocentric, in that most European countries really did start as America didn't, with kind of one ethnic group. I mean, Britain is, 4 small countries come together, but there really are these layers of, this is what a French person is. And on top of that, there's when I've traveled almost everywhere else in the world, you see a much more formalized class structure than we have in the USA. And all these are barriers that as an immigrant from, say, Iraq, if you're an intelligent guy, you'd have to be aware of at some level. I mean, that's
although I would disagree with you about Europe. I would say that there's a lot of racism in Europe, and I don't count Britain in that. In France, I lived there for a couple of years in the mid-90s. I was regularly told to go back to Algeria. Obviously, I'm not from Algeria. Exactly. I was never abused like that. I've spent so much time in the United States in various different places. Even when you go to places like Alabama and Georgia and so on, I have never been abused in the way that I used to be abused regularly in France. And it wasn't until very recently, I'd say in the last 10, 15 years or so, that they got rid of, so in their bakeries, they had these little chocolate balls and they were called Negroes' heads. And you would go into a bakery and you'd ask for a Negro head. And that is just until, this went into the 2000s,
Were they tasty?
One, I have to say.
Yeah, I couldn't try it.
I would have ordered one once. But no, I don't disagree with that. I think America and the Anglo descent countries, as far as I know, just like wonky political science guy, are the least racist countries in the world. And in almost every country, like if you travel as a white in Asia, a lot of people don't know this. If you travel as a white in Asia, if you travel as a white or black guy in Latin America, especially have a big American flag on your bag, they still remember, how many government leaders we killed. So on down the line, you're going to get, often in an almost friendly way in a pub or a bar, but a lot more racial and regional and class hostility than you would anywhere in the USA ever. And again, I think Britain is good on this. France is not. But my only thing was that even beyond the racial prejudice, there is that sort of ethnic idea of you're a Norwegian and you're not. Last sentence, friends of mine have said, I'm Turkish or whatever. I lived in Germany for 25 years. My dad's a German citizen. Are you German? Hell no. It's a very emphatic thing that you would never hear a Mexican American say. And I do think that matters.
Lou, what were you going to say?
Oh yeah, I would personally love it if immigrants co-opted America first. I think they would make the people on the right's head explode. Like everybody who wants, who that's their go-to moniker.
But what about the other way? The fact that what they're talking about would be what difference would education, crime, the way people viewed their abilities and where they can go, their achievement in America, if they thought about America the way that the immigrants do. So Black Americans, Katharine talked about the immigrants come here because they feel that there's an advantage. Even if I'm struggling, there's a group that I'm beneath. Well, if the people who are natural born Americans, the Blacks who are, didn't think, they would be shocked and probably push back against both Will and Katharine about how little racism there is here, or about how people are doing, like, no, everything's racist, right? So they have that, they're so locked into that mindset. So you can't convince them. Oddly enough, just think about it. So a black, somebody with brown skin immigrant from another country can come here and be poor and probably not even speak English that well and say that, well, I'm struggling, but it's not that racist. And then turn to a black guy and they're like, what are you talking about? There's racism everywhere. I just experienced 4 things in the last 10 minutes while we were together. You just didn't notice it. So because they're not focused on it, that's the unfair advantage, that they're not focused on it. And we as Black Americans, whatever the history is that is true and it's different, that's fine, but we don't have to. There's nothing saying you have to harp on it. But then on the flip side, oddly enough, they brag about things. Like, I was thinking when you told that story about the candy, the Negro hit.
Yeah.
That
Tettenegg is what it was.
Right. Yeah. You head of the Negro. So you all tell me if I'm wrong here. I would bet that they would find a way to spin that as offensive, which you can understand why. That's easy. But at the same time, they would brag about it. They would find a way to spin it to a positive. They'll say something like, yeah, that's what I joked about. Is it good? It's the best thing in the store. Or they named it after us, because they will find a way to make it a positive. See, they always have to take something from us because we're so, super and wonderful and kind.
Like, look at all these white people with a little bit of Negro in them now after they consumed it, something like that.
Right. What do they want to be? Right.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you talk about the whole victim mentality, because that's one of the things I think in schools that we really have to fight against. Teachers need to. So, we've got all kinds of ethnic minorities. We're in a city, a standard inner city school. In terms of, we don't have guns in London so much. I mean, there are a few, but we don't have the gun problem that you have. But knives are an issue. We have the standard problems that inner city places have. And I would never give an assembly which was all about, I don't know, the man or the establishment is against you, and what are we going to do? And life is so hard. I might give an assembly about Serena Williams and say, look how hard she works. This is what time she wakes up in the morning. This is how she trains. This is how she's made a success of her life. All of that is so important to trying to get children out of that victim mentality, because that's what I say about the kind of bottom set mentality. It is a victim mentality. When you see that you're at the bottom, there's nothing that can be done. This is how it's always going to be. No matter what you do, the establishment is against you. And in a school, the bottom set kids just think, the school is against me. Everything's against me. The problem is you then ruin your own life by lowering your expectations that you have for yourself and not wanting to drive through. And so it's, I think one of the things that we managed to do well at Michaela, my school, is the kids are really driven, whether they're in the top set or the bottom set. So we don't have a bottom set mentality. And that's because we don't talk about it to the kids. And we make sure that those kids are achieving in the bottom set so that they can see, look, if I work hard, then I can do this and I can get the best sorts of grades that I can get. And that is something I feel the US public education system, which, I have done a bit of work with teachers over here and in Florida and, and here in New York. And I'm always a bit shocked by the things that I hear.
So, but before we get to the differences there, how is Michaela different from the other schools in the UK?
Yeah, well, different from lots of schools in the West, I'd say. We're very traditional. We believe in very strong discipline. I'm considered to be the strictest headmistress in the country. In fact, if you type into Google, who is the strictest teacher in the world, my name comes up. So and of course, people imagine that I'm marching down the corridors with whips and chains and so on, which is completely absurd. We just have strict systems, which means the kids don't turn around, they don't chat to each other, they're not staring out the window, they're concentrating on the teacher, their hands are always going up, and they're really engaged with their learning. And it means they learn loads and loads and loads, which is surprising given our intake in the inner city. You wouldn't necessarily imagine seeing that. Right. We teach the kids gratitude. which I think is a real antidote for the kind of entitlement culture where you see yourself as a victim and it's me, me, me. What more can you give me? When actually you teach them to feel grateful for whatever it is they have, however little it is, to be grateful for that, because you always have more than somebody else. And you deal the cards that you've got. And maybe your deck of cards isn't as good as the guy next door to you. Well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do at 85? You're going to be on your deathbed. You're going to say, well, I'm Black. My dad wasn't around. I was poor, so I couldn't make anything of my life. So here I am. I've wasted my whole life thinking there's nothing I could do. Or do you take the cards that you've got and do you deal them? Now, the advantage our kids have is that they do get a fantastic education with us, right? There are a whole load of kids elsewhere. I was just reading about LeBron James's
I was going to mention that.
And it really breaks my heart because he's a good guy. He's put his money and his reputation on this school, trying to help, and he's trying. Right. And of course, he's had the school for 5 years, and most recently, not a single kid is performing at grade level
for 3 years.
Oh,
it was 3. No one's passed in 3 years.
Yeah, no one's passed.
Yes, had to switch 5, but they haven't passed for 3 years.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And that, and the thing is, it's fascinating because I went on Twitter and I read yesterday, and I was jet lagged and I was up in the middle of the night and for whatever possessed me, I decided to go on Twitter and I wrote about what I just read, which was an article from a few years back about his school, which was explaining that it was going to have a very progressive curriculum, which of course is a bad idea, and that they were going to be teaching yoga and gardening. Mm-hmm. And
Lou was mentioning that.
Yeah.
Your tweet about gardening, right. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I wrote and said, yoga and gardening, like, what is this insanity? I mean, and I say insanity because I then came to realize that there were people out there who thought this was a great idea. And this is despite the proof of the fact that he's pumped all this money in there, all this care and love, and the kids still aren't achieving. So maybe there's something wrong with the curriculum. Well, maybe there's something wrong with yoga and gardening.
But let's couple that with something else that's in the news education-wise. You mentioned Florida and how Florida has this new Black history curriculum, and there's this debate over whether they said that slavery was good, which is a silly debate because it didn't say that. But I look at it as a different thing. Only thing I tweeted out about it was just a question. I was like, "Did the kids read and do math yet?" I mean, anybody focus on that?
Exactly.
So when Lou mentioned that you tweeted out about that, I'm like, yes, it's great to learn gardening and yoga and anything else you want to learn. Why do people think everything that you need to learn in life has to be in the classroom? There's a finite amount of time, right? You got to drill kids and stuff, repetition is the mother of pedagogy. You got to repeat stuff. So how exactly, not just gardening that, I use gardening as a pivot, but even with this debate about Black history, it's part of history. You're teaching history, so some of it should be there. But to have a whole 216-page curriculum on Black history, I'm not concerned about whether it's right or wrong. I got a problem with you investing that much time. There's not enough time to because what are they actually doing? I mean, you visited American schools. The number one thing they're doing is trying to get the kids that came in from last year who aren't on grade level up to grade level. So it's remedial. The number two thing they're doing is trying to get the kids who are on grade level to pass this year's test. That's 87% of the school day. And then behavior. When do they have time to go through this 200-page thing and say, okay, I'm going to teach you about this thing? There's simply not enough time. Yeah. So why do we think we can teach everything in the classroom?
Well, the thing is, you say that's what's happening. That's what should be happening.
That's what they're trying to do.
That's what should be happening. Right. But there's so much pressure on schools, I mean, both in this country and in the UK, where all these different things need to be taught. And so everyone's just ticking a box. I mean, what I want you to just understand as well. So all these people were saying, I learned how to garden at home and it was so brilliant. My dad and I gardened together. Like, yeah, you and your brother, there were two of you. Imagine trying to do that with 800 children. Mm-hmm. How are you getting 800 children to learn about gardening? And anyone who did learn about gardening, I'd love to hear what you learned. How much do you know about plants? How much do you know about soil? I would love to know, because that's what learning is. what do you remember?
Right.
And what can you discuss about it? The idea that, oh, but I remember it and it was a bit of fun. Well, and some guy said that, and I said, look, I'll tell you what isn't fun: being functionally illiterate and functionally enumerate for your whole life. That isn't fun. And, you know, it's the school's job to make sure that you come out with those basics. So if over 5 years, we're unable to bring children to grade level when it comes to their math and their English, then we should be spending more time on that. What I don't understand is that people have this sense of, well, you can only have 3 hours of math per week. That's it. So you got to fill the time with something. So we're going to fill it with yoga. Yoga. I mean, the idea of having 800 children doing yoga while meanwhile they can't read. They can't read. I mean, I don't understand where the controversy is. If they can't read, you have to teach them how to read. I don't know. But
that's why they think. That's why you're so strict. Lou,
I wonder if I have 2 young kids. So my oldest is 3, and the second one is going to be 2 soon.
Ask her what to do with them. I'm going to move out the way.
Yeah. and just watching them develop, I know that I went through that development, but I'm watching it here, and I forgot what it was like to be a 3-year-old, to be a 2-year-old.
Yes.
And I wonder if a lot of these people who are commenting, they've gone through an educational system where they've been given the building blocks to read, to be able to do math, and now they're looking backwards and they don't remember what was necessary. So they're like, oh, like I can enrich yoga has enriched my life. Gardening has enriched my life. Obviously, this second grader's life can be enriched by this stuff. And it's like you're breaking down the boundaries between adults and children. And it's obviously having, harmful effects.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying is absolutely right. So people who have had the more traditional education, they take it, they use it, they have a great life, and then they pull the ladder up from underneath them. And they say, nobody else is going to come up this, because I remember that it was a bit boring at school. I had boring Miss who so-and-so who talked on and on about history. I don't think history is so important. Who cares? Let's do yoga instead. Now, it's very much that. They feel better because it sounds nice. It feels nice. And this is what I think LeBron has just fallen into that trap, sadly. And because the thing is, everybody wants to feel like they're compassionate. Everybody wants to feel like they're a bit edgy and cool and lovely. And they're not going to do the boring thing of having the old teacher with the glasses at the front talking to you about boring algebra. Let's do something fun. But as I said, I tell you what isn't fun. When you're not able to access the stuff that everybody else has been able to access and carry with them throughout their lives. And that is sadly the case, unfortunately, for kids who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, because if you go to a private school and your family takes you on holidays to the Maldives and so on, and you talk in the evenings around the dinner table with your family about the politics of the day, you pick up so much knowledge from your normal life. But if your parents don't have any books and you don't go to art galleries together and so on, you're not picking up any knowledge. So you depend entirely on your school to give you that knowledge. And if they're spending it on gardening, which I can tell you is going to be chaotic, and yoga, which again will be chaotic, you're getting a few droplets of knowledge about gardening, but not much. And you're missing out on crucial time, which could be spent on the math and the English that you need in order to succeed in your life. And the problem I have is that I'm trying to convince generally the white middle classes of this, people who feel a little bit awkward about their own privilege, and people who want to feel good amongst the masses. Here's what I'm doing for you. I'm giving you yoga. I'm giving you gardening to make it all wonderful for you. And these luxury beliefs that they run around with, thinking that they're making life better for these kids, does not make life better for these kids. Now, advice for you, Lou, with your kids is you have to read to them a lot. So please don't, people in the school system always take offense when I say this, but the fact is, like with any profession, you have good teachers and you have not so good teachers. It is also the case that teaching is extremely hard to do very, very well. And unfortunately, I think parents can just assume, well, I'll leave it to the school and the school will take care of it. But my position is very much that all parents should be homeschooling, even if you send your child to school, right?
She told me that, and I do it.
Yeah, exactly. You need to read, this primary, elementary head teacher is a friend of mine. She was explaining to me that at school, the one-to-one teaching time that they've got for reading every day with a child is 2 minutes.
Ooh, 2, I thought 5.
So you've got 2 minutes with every child to read with them. So you are imagining, if you don't do reading with your child at home, they've got 2 minutes a day. That's if they're lucky. It depends on the behavior, but if things are going well, that's what they're aiming for. Now, the way children get to learn how to read is at home mainly, right? The schools are doing something, but the reason why none of those children are reading at grade level is because the schools can only do so much. And, the schools could probably do more if they had more of a traditional outlook and if they had good behavior and all that. There's a million things that schools could do. And I've spent my whole life fighting for better schooling. But the fact is, if parents are not reading with their child at home, their child is going to struggle to read. Don't give your child a smartphone. The smartphone and the book cannot compete with the smartphone. The book is black and white and flat. The phone has all kinds of colors and explosions and pop-ups and so on. So if your child has a phone or an iPad, they will find a book boring. And then I know some people will say, that's not the case with my child. Okay, your child is exceptional. Generally speaking, most children are going to find a phone more exciting. So keep your children away from the electronics, keep them away from the screens, unless there's a particular kind of math app that you want to do together and you both look at the screen together doing it. But you need to read daily with your children. And with their age, I would say at least 15 minutes. You could do more than that. At least 15 minutes where you're sat together, run your finger under the words as you are reading them, okay? You can read the words, you can talk about the pictures, ask them questions, say things like, what do you think is going to happen next? Ooh, well, I think it's going to be this. What do you think? And that sort of thing. Read books that have rhymes, read them over and over again. If your child is then finishing off the sentence, don't say to yourself, oh, well, she knows that now. No, that's great. Let them memorize the rhymes and the words and the sounds and love the sounds and love the written word that matches with the spoken word. That's why you want to run your hand under they need to make that connection and that love of reading. Now, look, there's phonics. The school should do phonics with them. Again, I don't know if you can depend on that. Get yourself a little box of phonics cards, do them at home. Then the children understand the sound to the letters, and they will then learn how to read. That and there are lots of kids who start school at 5 years old and they know how to read. And then what teachers are doing is they've got half the class who can read, half the class who can't read. And then they're spending their time with the kids who can't read, trying to catch them up. It's very hard. You've got a class full of 30 kids. How are you meant to do that, right?
It also hurts the kids that are doing well because they get ignored. Well, you're already you're at grade level. You could be excelling, but you just go sit there while I catch everyone else up.
That's right. And you know what? That's the way that it is.
What you get.
So you as a parent need to be getting them harder and harder books at home, helping to extend them, getting excited about reading. The other thing that is that when you sit and read with them, they're bonding with you and they see that mommy and daddy like reading. And this is something they want to impress you. They want to share that with you and they want to bond with you. And if you do that over reading, they will read for their lives, and it's the most wonderful gift you can give a child because so much knowledge is in books.
Right. That's where they are. Will, she said something earlier though, when she was talking about the top set and bottom set. And that even had me thinking about, how that manifests itself in the sense that, remember, I don't know if they went away from, remember 10 years ago when we had this big push that we weren't going to grade. We weren't going to keep score, right? Because we, the mercy rule and all that kind of thing. As if the kids don't still know that I scored 20 points and you didn't. So I saw this with my kid in school because he was one of those kids who started school at 4 and could read. And they have these, so they went away from the other thing they did, but they have the books with the letters, right? So they have these letters A through like Z, and then it goes to different grade books. And the higher the letter, the more complex the paragraphs and the words are. And so once they assessed your reading, they grouped you kind of like that within the same classroom. And my son came home. It's like, yeah, I'm reading the L book, and those kids are reading the right. So this is him at like 4 or 5, just like, yeah, well, I'm one of the better readers. They're reading these books. So even though they're trying to normalize and they have them together, Montessori style, same class, all this stuff, they still know they're like Johnny can't read as well. So what do you think about that? Do you think that that is a beneficial approach? And speak to the just the psychological effect of how people still still keep score, they still know the differences, and all of this, we're all equal, won't really change anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a stupid waste of time. Like, as you know, one of the mitzvahs I try to do is occasionally coaching. And I mean, literally, usually for leagues below 12 in the States, certainly if we're talking about, soccer, football, or basketball, people sometimes try to do the no score thing. All that happens is that someone's like little girlfriend will be up in the stands, like keeping score if they're like 11, or like someone's dad will do it. I mean, everyone's very aware of what their 3-point shooting percentage is. All that happens is that it becomes an annoying time waster that distracts people from simply watching or participating in the game. Obviously, the point of a competitive sport is that you score more points than the other guy. Obviously, one of the points of education is that you pick up a body of knowledge that in some respects you can measure. So I think that's absolutely foolish. And I mean, when these kids go for A levels or SATs or ACTs or whatever's used in your country or your state, they're damn sure going to be scored then. So it's just a complete waste of time. I do have a couple comments on what Miss Snuffy is still the phrase that comes to mind as a social media fan, but said in terms of the stuff about, I think this is really important in terms of this idea that we should teach kids trendy, fun stuff. No, like your parents certainly should, and you certainly should learn about that stuff with your friends and so on down the line. I mean, it's a great idea for your mom or your dad to enroll you in a martial arts class, go there 2 or 3 times a week, learn to fight, that kind of thing. But no, that's not really the place of the school if you have 6 hours of real education a day. And this comes up a lot. Like, the way I would summarize this in one sentence is that critical theory and all that sort of thing, this is a bit away from the point, but was originally designed by people who were aware of kind of theory without being too glib or mundane about this. Like all the Pomo and Marxist critiques and so on came from people who were really aware of the basic ideas of Western culture, modern feminism, so on. And these were designed to be kind of an additional 10%. Like, you have to understand that some of these ideas aren't quite fair to women. And having read the ideas and then the critique, I would actually agree with that. But you can't just read the critiques and come up with this sort of vague idea that your society is shit, but you don't quite know why. And that's very often what happens when you go to kind of an edgy novel school. You just read the Communist Manifesto 8 times, and you don't read Adam Smith or Keynes or anyone that's being criticized. So I think that's a big problem that goes well beyond just the yoga and gardening. Like, if you don't know basic... Yeah.
Although I think you're, even in your description of the terrible books that they're reading, like Communist Manifesto, if only it were that good. Like, it's not even that good, especially like the books, like here in the US, they read these like weird sort of modern romance novels about a couple who meets in New York. And then I was reading this just the day I was looking at this book that they look at in schools, and I was just thinking, this is like, there's nothing wrong with the book, and it's fine to have it in your school library, but it should not be the book that everybody is studying in class. You're meant to study classics in class, because otherwise you would never read them. Like, that's the whole point.
This is actually an important point in terms of like the critique of some of this stuff, like the hard R-rated garbage texts in class. Like, I think the traditional conservative critique, when you see like the oral sex edition of Genderqueer, is like, ew, those kids shouldn't be doing that at that age. And although, I mean, I think most people had fun with that sort of thing if they're junior of high school themselves, like, yeah, sure, I'm parental age now, get it out of the library. But a deeper critique is, why are you reading that at all? Like, if you have a certain number of reading hours in an English class, there's almost never a situation where Genderqueer Johnny and Julie hook up is going to be the best book available. That's like reading a darker version of Archie comics. Like, get that crap out of there. So like the debate about should there be sexual texts or like women's erotic, as you described, romance novels or whatever, like in the library for senior form students, like that's an interesting conversation. I don't care. But the question of should you be reading that in your primary academic classes? No. And I think a lot of Americans in particular, I find Brits to be a little better on this, but a lot of Americans don't understand how much of day-to-day language comes from the old Greek and Roman myths, the Bible. Like I called someone a doubting Thomas the other day. They had no idea what it was.
Yes.
I mean, you're talking about like the stories of Jesus. So you have to have some familiarity with that, or you're going to be embarrassing. Like an educated Chinese who didn't know what Confucius was.
Right.
Yes. Well, that's it. So you're talking about cultural literacy. And I know you and I have spoken about E.D. Hirsch before, and E.D. Hirsch is American, and he's a Democrat, and he's 93, and he's spent his whole life writing in books, like loads of books about the importance of knowledge. Is he coming back?
I think he doesn't want you to see his face.
Right.
He's crying because education's so good.
There he is. He's tried so hard to get these ideas, what you just said, that cultural literacy matters. And if you don't know a rose would smell as sweet, if you don't know what it is to be a Scrooge, then you're not able to read a newspaper article and understand what it's about. And the thing is that you're not going to pick Dickens up just for fun, and you're not going to all of the classical stuff if it's not taught in your English class. And it's interesting, Will, when you're saying, about reading the novel or the book in your class. Well, it's not just reading, as you know, it's writing essays on it, studying it. So it could take months of reading that book, and so you've only got a few books every year that you're going to do. And so the time, as we were saying when we began, is limited. And so you have to choose wisely. And unfortunately, the whole dead white men thing, everybody is so against them. And the thing I'm always trying to say is that they don't like the dead white men because they are white men. When the most important thing about the dead white men is not that they're white or that they're men, it's the fact that they are dead. That's what makes them important. Right. Shakespeare is important because he's been influencing literature for 400 years and he's been dead for 400 years. Like, that's the point. But everyone has forgotten that, and they just hate these guys because they're white men, and then they get driven underground. Now, Shakespeare's still, he's still fighting back.
They are not here so much.
No?
Yeah, he's fighting a lot less here.
Right.
It's harder to cancel him there. He's been canceled here.
Right.
I mean, I think, Will, do you remember the university, Notre Dame? There was a university where you can get a PhD in English without doing Shakespeare.
There are quite a few. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of a canon, obviously, you do want to adjust it. You can put in speeches by MLK or something. Right. But that idea that there are 100 documents that are really defining for your society, and that in college you should read them, I mean, has an obvious extraordinary value. And
I mean, you're also stealing from the kids, though, because when they bring in the newer authors who may be very good, those authors, even if you go last century's contemporaries, you talk about James Baldwin and things of that nature. So you bring in those books, which is fine, but those people read the classics, and now you're going to use the person who read the classic as a proxy for the classic.
Yeah, but I'm okay with Baldwin, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but I mean, if you replace it with,
they're dead.
Right. Yeah, it's not even going to be Baldwin. It's going to be.
I'm just thinking about the world we live in too, where in pop culture it's all about remakes too, and it's like, well, here's this whole wealth of hundreds of years of the English language that you're not even touching, that you could very well remake, and and kind of it's sort of a gift to the world that nobody is really tapping into.
And when do you have, look, we all know at our age, you're working, you're trying to pay your mortgage, you're really busy raising kids, whatever it is. And so you don't sit around reading Dickens. It's such an advantage to be of school age, where you have all the time to be able to really study this stuff. And then it gives you the basics to be able to go off. And so at university, sure, you can study any variety of things. I'm just talking about secondary school, high school. What are we going to give you? We should give you the basics. And look, if you have time, I'm not going to say gardening or yoga, because and the reason why I don't, because that's not just about time. I think it's chaotic. I think that it's a bit of a fantasy that we all have in our heads. I mean, we can't do gardening. We're an urban school. We don't even have any fields. We have no grass. We have no trees. Where are we going to be doing gardening?
Maybe that's more of a reason we should be doing gardening. So we're running up
rooftop gardening is the way to go. You build a green roof. I guarantee you, if
There you
you
go.
sought out a grant that was like minority head-led school seeks a
20 million.
green roof with X number of 15-foot trees, there is
Amazing.
you would receive money. There is a colleague of mine that half jokingly says she's going to apply for like the most ridiculous woke grants imaginable. And I think she would get about half of them. Like one of her ideas, I'm not going to name the person, but was to have a drummer from Senegal accompany her classes in like history so they could be more authentically Black. And I am 100% sure that money would be given for that if she has.
Without a doubt. So the last question to you, I already know it's going to be bleak, but I have to ask it. So do you see, as the culture shifts, do you see things, I mean, not down the road, but now in the next 6 months or so, do you see things getting better?
Look, in Britain, we've been having a bit of a war between the traditionalists and the progressives. And I think the traditionalists have made some inroads. And I know that there are lots of people who quietly follow me on Twitter. They would never say so out loud. We get 800 visitors a year to our school, Michaela, and your listeners are welcome to come and see us. Yes, and you too, Charles, are welcome to come. So there are people who are interested, but I do worry about the American public school system. I do. There's so many things that are wrong with it. I mean, we could do 2 or 3 shows.
Every time she comes here, we blow her mind. We just hit her with stuff. And she's like, that's real? She can't believe it. She thought it was bad. And then she comes here. They attack her there. She comes here. It's like, ooh, I'm ready to go home. I feel great now. We energize you, though.
Yeah. It is bad here. But what I always say about America that's really interesting is that it's the same thing about the race point in a way, which is that you are both worse and better than we are at the same time. Mm-hmm. So while things are worse here, at the same time, I went to Phoenix and I went there for an educational conference, and I saw all these charter schools doing amazing things, and there was just a real buzz that just doesn't exist in Britain, because we don't have the freedoms that some of your states give you to be able to do things differently. So on the one hand, that was really exciting and better. But then on the other hand, you've got some of your public schools that are much, much worse. So I don't know. And that is because your country is much more splintered in that way. You know, those people who, well, I mean, I don't know how. Every time you have an election, there's always this idea that the president must mend the country and so on. I don't know how any president, whether Democrat or Republican, is ever going to mend the country. I don't know. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, so I guess we have a longer way to wait for these corrections. We should be following you instead of you following us. She is Katharine Birbalsingh, headmistress of the Michaela School in London. Katharine, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
From you commies who lame, no, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to save. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.